Today on Public Research.
The other side is, Baptists being lynched, every single evangelical church being shut down in occupied cities, Christians being shot by the Russian Orthodox Army at checkpoints, Baptists not being allowed to openly practice their religion because their religion is too American. It's not the proper church. It's not the proper type of Christian. And so when I'm meeting people who've had their churches shut down or have had their churchgoers arrested and tortured, or they know the guys that were lynched back in 2014 by the Russians back then, just lynched at checkpoints. And I'm trying to compare that in comparison. And I'm thinking from a Christian point of view, which is supposed to be Tucker Carlson's point of view. Which one of these things does he talk about? He talks about the former every single time. The others is American Christian denominations like Baptists being lynched, doesn't talk about it at all. A church that has obvious security problems for the state because of its infiltration of the Russian government. No, we need to focus on that as horrible Christian persecution. And it's like this for every single thing he talks about.
Journalist and YouTuber Dylan Burns on the state of the war in Ukraine, Israel, Gaza, being a YouTuber, left-wing reactions to October 7th, and the future of the Democratic Party. Are you in a hotel?
Yes, I'm in a hotel.
I am so sorry, man. God.
It is what it is, man. World keeps on turning. I've seen a lot of people lose their homes. You got to keep it in perspective. It happens.
Yeah, man. I can't imagine. No, I was jokingly gonna be like, don't you want to apologize to me for missing our interview?
Oh, I thought you were gonna go with the Lex Friedman approach. Dylan, can you forgive the fire?
Oh my God, Lex.
Can you forgive the fire, Dylan?
God, yeah, he is. Did you ever watch Lex Friedman's Jared Kushner interview?
No, I did not. I honestly don't watch Lex Friedman interviews that often. I think most of the time when he gets to like humanizing a person or getting across their general perspective, he's very good at that. I don't know how good he is about challenging certain perspectives or the certain goal of that interview, which seemed to be as a peace platform, where Zelensky was much more clearly treating it like any other media interview and not like it was a United Nations peace conference that's broken up with Dollar Shave Club interviews. I mean, ads. It's just not.
I thought the decision to do it in Russian actually was great because Zelensky, I finally felt like I got to see the real Zelensky, his sort of brilliance and his humor. It was much better than him doing in sort of broken English, I thought. Zelensky,
I mean, I feel like you can get the same thing from him speaking Ukrainian.
Well, sure, but it was better in English, I thought.
I think him speaking a combination of the languages was good. I understand how it's difficult for the translators, and I understand how that must have been frustrating from Lex Friedman's perspective, having been in his shoes, trying to make out with with a a chicken scratch understanding of the language, exactly what's being said. But I think it resulted in a decent product at the end of the day, and I think that the translators, generally speaking, got across the viewpoints of Zelensky. So I think it did fine, but I understand from a practical point of view the difficulty with trying to translate three separate languages.
Yeah, I wanted to start off by showing you a clip because I'm asking myself a question and I want to ask it with you.
My government and your government particularly are supporting this dictator in Ukraine who's oppressing Christians, who is banning people's native language and books in their native language. He's a book burner. And that's totally cool because we hate Putin. That's not totally cool, is it?
So would you just let Putin take Ukraine?
I would say let's have an election in Ukraine and let the Ukrainian people elect their own leader and get rid of the midget dictator who now oppresses them.
So here's my question.
Yeah.
I think he's evil. But it's just astonishing. I'm almost speechless. I don't even know what to make of him. of this, how appalling what he is. What do you make of this guy?
Look, I have no belief in his genuineness when he comes to the conflict. I have no belief in it because I've seen him lie about it again and again and again. And when it's obvious that he lied, or it's obvious he got something wrong, or it's one or the other, he either lied or he got something wrong. He never corrects his mistakes, and it's sometimes just stuff that's horribly blatant. Like from when the Jack Textera leaks came out, and he was going out there publishing altered versions of it that inflated Ukrainian death numbers in the exact opposite direction of what the leaks actually said. And he put that on like prime time, #1 news channel in the country that's being viewed by the most Americans on cable news, puts that as the segment, and then he repeats it again, like on the next show, and then never issues a correction. Fox never makes him issue a correction. He's no longer, he never had, I think, a dedication to the truth on this. I just think that now that he's away from Fox, he can be as dirty as possible with no one trying to clean his image. He can be as smarmy and as the dirt and lie as much as he wants, and just find the narrative that best suits his preordained position, which is he doesn't want to support Ukraine, so he needs to find reasons not to want to support Ukraine, either because they're just as bad as the Russians, or because maybe they're even worse than the Russians. Well, and it's like, for example, like every single thing he just said there was a lie. And I don't want to go to every one, but the one that's the most painful is probably for me, is hearing him talk about like the oppression of Christians. What he's talking about is the banning of the Moscow branch of the Orthodox Church ran by Patriarch Kirill, which is a religious leader that has said that if you invade Ukraine and you die fighting and killing Ukrainians, you go to heaven. It's like a ticket. This is somebody who has made himself part of the war machine. And that church has become a spy apparatus by which the Russians have deeply infiltrated Ukrainian society, but they've also tried to infiltrate American society. They tried to take agents, move them over to the United States to infiltrate Orthodox churches in America. Now, that doesn't mean they got far. That doesn't mean we need to go like, oh, we need to go bust up the church in America. They got caught coming into the United States with the documents, okay? It wasn't the most complex operation in the world. But when we're talking about, that's our country. Now think about being in a country that they can largely understand each other because they speak languages or languages where you can either largely understand people. Ukrainian, you can understand a lot of what they're saying, or a lot of them speak Russian too. And so you have that on top of an interconnected religious system and an interconnected highway system. Of course, it's deeply infiltrated. And so during a war, they passed a law that says if you are a religious institution in a country that's invading us, you're not allowed to, its head is based in the capital of the country that's invading us. You're not allowed to operate within our country. That, in effect, only banned one church, and that was the Russian branch of the Orthodox Church. Now, people can say that that's oppressing Christians, and you can make an argument about religious freedom, but it's a question about national security pitted against the fact that this church was being obviously used to go deep into Ukrainian society. The individual liberty of someone saying, I want to be with this church, even though I know that it's been largely involved in this. That doesn't mean every single branch or every single priest has been involved in it, but that's just how it is. So that's one side of the Christian oppression. The other side is, Baptists being lynched, every single evangelical church being shut down in occupied cities, Christians being shot by the Russian Orthodox Army at checkpoints, Baptists not being allowed to openly practice their religion because their religion is too American. It's not the proper church. It's not the proper type of Christian. And so when I'm meeting people who've had their churches shut down or have had their churchgoers arrested and tortured, or they know the guys that were like lynched back in 2014 by the Russians back then, like just lynched at checkpoints. And I'm trying to compare that in comparison. And I'm thinking from a Christian point of view, which is supposed to be Tucker Carlson's point of view. Which one of these things does he talk about? He talks about the former every single time. The others is Christians, American Christian denominations like Baptists being lynched, doesn't talk about it at all. A church that has obvious security problems for the state because of its infiltration of the Russian government. No, we need to focus on that as horrible Christian. persecution, and it's like this for every single thing he talks about.
Yeah, I think you're giving him too much credit. That it's a good. He actually cares about Christians in need, and it's good. I think it's basically just dog whistle anti-Semitism. It's like when Candace Owens. Did you see she posted after the Lex Friedman Zelensky? She said, "Oh, you're smiling as you ethnically cleanse Ukraine of Christians," and it's like clearly. The narrative is this is
well. I think that's definitely true for
Zelensky's
Candace Owens.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't seen Tucker Carlson make that connection. I've just seen him make the connection that the Christians of Ukraine are being persecuted by the horrible Ukrainian government, while also ignoring the tons of American Christian denominations that are being persecuted. And like there were 40 evangelical churches in Mariupol before the Russians took over the city. There's none. There's zero today. They were all shut down. And instead of like talking about that, he focuses on the church that we know is openly being used as a spy apparatus within Ukraine, being not even like, oh, you're not allowed to be an Orthodox Christian anymore, which you can't be it's like you can't practice Baptist like preaching in occupied territory.
Well,
you just
I mean,
can't.
he's promoting Holocaust.
It's about just specifically.
So. He's an. I think Tucker is clearly he's some kind of anti-Semite. He promotes anti.
I mean, I can't say because I mean, he of course he's like promoted people. He's had everybody on his show, so of course he's also had anti-Semites on his show, and he's had Alexander Dugin on his show. And when I see him bring on people like Dugin, and he gives them no pushback, and it's just like an unfiltered Duginist view of the world. Like I
don't think he brings everyone. I think he brings Holocaust deniers, people who hate Ukraine, people who hate Israel. I think it's a consistent type that he's bringing on his show, basically. You know.
Yeah, I mean it's I've yet to see him bring on anybody on his show that could ever passionately argue the pro-Ukrainian position. He has consistently shown one view of it, while saying, I am the alternative perspective, I'm pushing against the establishment. But all he's done is just accepted the alternative establishment view, which is largely the Russian viewpoint. When he was walking around like the Russian grocery store, doing the sniffs, talking about the sanctions, like that was something that you would not be surprised if you saw on Solnyev Live, if you saw it on the primetime Russian state TV shows. That's not to say he's taken every single Putinist talking point. He's accepted literally everything that's Putin said, but he's not offering a nuanced perspective of the war. He's largely offering a Russian sympathetic perspective of the war, while needlessly demonizing Ukraine because he needs to undercut American support for Ukraine as much as possible. Both because he is more of a isolationist ilk when it comes to the type of supporting like fights for democracy overseas. He doesn't believe in that type of foreign interventionism, but also because a lot of the other far right individuals that he likes to pal around with also are against aid to Ukraine. Viktor Orban, somebody that he made a flattering documentary of, even though he's one of the most corrupt officials in all of Europe within the European Union. And he's this guy who's supposed to fight against the swamp. Doesn't mention that, just talking about how cool he is for the family, and he's surging birth rates which have since plummeted in Hungary, by the way. He talks about that, makes this flattering documentary deeply against support for Ukraine. And this is true for most of the European parties that he has talked about either covered favorably. They're all anti-Ukraine parties, as in they're against aid to Ukraine, or they have membership that like the AfD, which is even pro-Russian, and they'll go into occupied territories and like do tours and stuff. So it's the people he pals around with. It's the isolationist viewpoint, and I think he also sees probably Ukraine as like another woke operation that's not of importance to the United States, because the values that are being fought for are not values that he cares about, which is things like sovereignty, democracy, the independence of the institutions from or authoritarian control, the development of a free civil society. These are not like themes that I ever see him talking about or caring about.
Foreign interference is a topic you got to be super careful about, right? I don't think you should ever allege this person's being paid by Russia and stuff, but obviously it's happening, right? So it's a very
Yeah, I mean,
tricky-
we know this. We know this from the TED
Yeah.
media scandal that the
Oh,
Russian Today
I was
and
just-
Russian operatives have funneled millions upon millions of dollars into the United States,
So-
trying to prop up media that they think is either destabilizing to the United States or is favoring their interests and even funneling them stories.
Speaking of that, I was just about to play this for you. This is my
Oh
edit.
boy.
This is my edit, but I think it's funny.
And they know it. But I don't know that it matters anymore. This is psychotic. Ukraine is the enemy of this country. Ukraine is our enemy, being funded by the Democrats. I will stress this again. One of the greatest enemies of our nation right now is Ukraine. They are expanding this war. Now, don't get me wrong, I know. You've got criminal elements of the U.S. government pushing them and guiding them and telling them what to do. Ukraine is now accused, a German war issued for blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline, triggering this conflict. Ukraine is the greatest threat to this nation and to the world.
Can't believe it.
We should rescind all funding and financing, pull out all military support, and we should apologize to Russia. They know it. But I don't know that it matters anymore. This is psychotic.
We should apologize to Russia. Okay, now do you notice?
Remember Putin's opening speech about the war? My pipeline. Come on, he gets the basic history wrong. He doesn't know really what started the war. It seems like it's not been that long ago. He was streaming at the time. He should remember if he paid any attention. I mean, in this same speech and spiel he goes on to, he talks about how like continuing support for Ukraine could start a Russian invasion of Estonia and it would trigger a third world war, and then they'll use their invasion of Estonia to move down into Poland and then crush Warsaw. And he's talking, he needs to put on like a general cap and like, you know, just put on a big jacket, put like a million different medals on from whatever. It could be Girl Scout, Boy Scout, whatever. And, you know, go out there and command the troops to victory. Those are the valuable military resources that he's offering, military
Dylan,
insight.
I want to show you this other version I made, because now look at Tim's eyes during this, and this version I think is very illuminating. Now look closely at what I added, his little notes. Tim, please hit these tonight. Ukraine is our enemy. Ukraine is the greatest threat. Now look at his eyes.
Know it. But I don't know that it matters anymore. This is psychotic. Ukraine is the enemy of this country. Ukraine is our enemy, being funded by the Democrats. I will stress this again. One of the greatest enemies of our nation right now is Ukraine.
He's reading something. He's reading something. Now look at his eyes.
They are expanding this war. Now, don't get me wrong, I know.
What you're saying. The thing is, right? I can't know if he's just, his eyes are just darting around the room, if he's reading off a list of talking points that was given to him by TED Media, his own talking points.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we know that during this speech where he says the main enemy of the United States is not climate change, it's not credit card debt, it's not any financial bubble of any sort, it is not the public debt, which, maybe a libertarian viewpoint might be like, oh, the public debt's going to destroy us all, or fiscal responsible viewpoint. It's not any of these things. It's not atomic fire even, really. It's Ukraine and what Ukraine's doing to the world. It's Ukraine. It's not a believable spiel on its face. And so knowing that he was getting money while going off like this does lead you to believe, like, exactly why is he going off on this specifically? Why is he going off so hard? Is it just to get the contrarian views so he could be the person going so against the grain, where he's not just against Ukraine aid, he's against Ukraine as a concept because they're the evil, they're the enemy. Whatever it is, though, he's getting paid by the Russians during this time period, whether he was duped because he just got tricked by this fake Hungarian, Dutch, or whatever businessman that didn't exist and he could have Googled, or it was because he kind of just looked over it and took the money. Either way, he's not the responsible commentator that anyone should listen to, because he's either the dumbest schmuck imaginable, and he's just like literally a goon that they've been able to take advantage of, or somebody who's actively willing to work with the Russians to undermine the United States and its interests for money from foreign governments. So either way, it's not a good outcome for Tim. I think I'll unsubscribe.
You know, when the Ukraine war broke out, me and my friend, I called him. I was like, "Come over," and we just watched it. And I helpful. It was a good thing. I screen recorded my screen. I had RT next to like CNN, and I was just watching the news and like scrolling through Twitter. And what struck me was right in the beginning. Cassandra Fairbanks, who actually is Tim Pool's booker, she, the day of the invasion, was making she was like deriding Zelensky for his height, calling him mini-me or something like that. And I was like, what is this hatred of him? Immediately. This is before we had given Ukraine a lot of equipment or whatever. It struck me as inorganic, but again, you know, it's in the shadows. But
I mean, at that point, we had given some aid to Zelensky. Yeah. There had also been a long argumentation by people, including people on the left and even some on the right. You know, people on the right and the left, on the fringes, that the real fault for all this aggression was NATO expansion. That Zelensky had provoked this by some manner, either because they had been convinced that there was some genocide going on in the Donbass that just wasn't real, or they were convinced of one of the many Russo-centric talking points that had been pumped out either in Russian-speaking media and then regurgitated through their people by word of mouth or just by the niche circles that these people are traveling in. Like Lauren Southern, like, is going to talk to Dugin. Like, why? Like, when Dugin's going to talk to all these American commentators like Lauren Southern and Caleb Maupin, people on the right and on the fringe, we'll call Caleb Maupin fringe left. You know, that's one way this is making it into our circles. But also it's through the publication of the English-speaking Russian media sphere and trying to get these into our circles. So, I mean, it's not impossible for me to think that these could have made their way through these social back channels, or through them getting duped by state media, or by any of the countless probably Russian threads that they were posting in preparation for this, like this idea that really the Ukrainians are at fault, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
It's not good.
But either way, like, it's not none of it's a good outcome. None of it. It's either you're literally a useful idiot, or you are a nefarious actor working against the interests of not only a nation state being brutalized and trying to be erased off the map by another nation state, who is being aggressed upon constantly for the last decade and before that, but you're also working against your own nation state's interests, because it's not just that the Russian state media apparatus or Russian state disinformation actors are meant just to undermine American interests in Ukraine. They want to generally cause enough discontent and destabilization within the United States that would, generally speaking, get our eye off the ball.
I want to go back to the invasion and show you something. When I knew Zelensky was really special, and it's a video which oddly did not get much attention, but I thought it was amazing. Maybe you don't even remember it, but it was one of the most stirring things I've ever seen. This video came out the day after, or the day of the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Сегодня я инициировал телефонный разговор с президентом Российской Федерации. Результат – тишина. Хотя тишина должна быть на Донбассе. Поэтому сегодня я хочу обратиться ко всем гражданам России. Не как президент. Я обращаюсь к российским гражданам как гражданин Украины. С вами нас разделяет более 2000 километров общей границы. Вдоль нее сегодня стоят ваши войска, почти 200 тысяч солдат, тысячи боевых машин. Ваше руководство одобрило их шаг вперед на территорию другой страны. И этот шаг может стать началом большой войны на европейском континенте. Мы точно знаем, нам не нужна война, не холодная, не горячая, не гибридная. Но если на нас будут наступать войска, если у нас попытаются отнять нашу страну, нашу свободу, наши жизни, жизни наших детей, мы будем защищаться. Не наступать, защищаться. Наступая, вы будете видеть наши лица. Не наши спины, наши лица.
The end of that, I just want, for people listening, I'm just going to repeat this.
Отнять нашу страну.
If they tried to take our country away from us,
Отнять нашу страну, нашу
our freedom, our lives,
свободу, наши жизни, жизни наших
the lives of our children,
детей, мы будем
we will defend ourselves.
защищаться. Не наступать,
Not attack, but defend ourselves.
защищаться. Наступать,
And when you attack us,
вы будете видеть наши
you will see our faces, not our backs, but our faces.
лица. Не наши спины, наши лица.
I thought that was so powerful. You can see it in his eyes. He's almost on the verge of tears.
He meant it. You know, I don't know if every other Ukrainian political figure would have made the same decisions in his shoes. Poroshenko, maybe, but it was making that decision in his shoes and then having such a good understanding of the media, such a good understanding of how not only to communicate with his own people and how to get the message out to his own people, and the way he packaged that message, but also how to deliver the message to an international audience and to explain the Ukrainian idea, the Ukraine as a concept, its history, why it's struggling, to the world at large. And that's a very difficult task to a world that has largely been giving the Russocentric view up to this point, and many of them might even not know Ukraine existed up until 2022. And he was given that task, and of course, in every instance, he wasn't able to inform everybody of all of Ukraine's struggle or all of its story, because now we're seeing his attempts to go on shows like Lex Friedman, now go on Piers Morgan, go on these other shows to try to describe it in more detail, because of course he was very busy at the time and he couldn't sit down and lecture every single person. But I think that largely speaking, given the time he had and the window he had and what he had to rally with, he did a fantastic job, and I couldn't see any other Ukrainian political figure in his shoes doing as well of a job in that area as him.
So I do want to pivot away from Ukraine, frankly, because me and you pretty much agree on it. I think it's pretty clear who the good guy and the bad guy is in this situation. Ukraine's defending their country. Russia's the aggressor. But before we do that, why don't so the Ukrainians still have that Russian city, what's it called? Kursk?
They've crossed the border into the Kursk region, and they've taken a city called Sudza. But they haven't taken the city of Kursk. They've invaded the Kursk region and taken a small city called Sudza, as well as some of the villages and little settlements around it, for probably political leverage and to, some would say, argue, divert resources away from Donetsk.
That's amazing. So Russia still hasn't taken back their territory from Ukraine.
No, the deadline was in January.
Wow. So I have been baffled that Ukraine has been able to hold out this much. Maybe it's a stupid question. Has Putin been going easy on Ukraine? Because I saw clips of some of these pro-Putin Russian like talk radio hosts, and they were very upset. Why aren't we destroying? Why did they have electricity? And they portray it as he's been way too soft on Ukraine. Is there any truth that he hasn't been going as hard as he could?
Well, it's okay. From their perspective, I understand, both from the perspective of being in a propaganda bubble where you're only ever told the glories of your military, and, you know, the party line that's said by the person at the head of the organization, it flows down the organization. Even if the logic doesn't make sense, sometimes the party line becomes the internal state logic. And so I think a lot of these people had really soothed themselves into believing that, you know, and as much as the rest of the world believed it, and I think the rest of the world believed it, it also helped them believe it, that they were the second most powerful nation on the planet. They're the largest, and that they have this long military legacy and history that they can claim upon, these large Soviet reserves. They're an atomic power. And since Putin's come into power, I mean, Yeltsin had the disaster in Chechnya, but then Putin invaded, and hey, kind of won. And then hey, look at what happened in Georgia. I mean, that was done real quick. And I mean, like, I mean, look at all. And look, if you look at what happened in Ukraine up to this point, when the Russians did enter the battlefield, they were a deciding factor. Now, the Russians would deny themselves entering the battlefield on multiple occasions, but every time that the rebels were about to basically lose in the Ukrainian civil wars, they describe it, but I would describe it as Russian incursions, was happening, and like it was about to all go down. Every time they'd move their troops in, and that would kind of salvage the situation, because now the Ukrainians don't just have to fight these rebels, mercenaries, and FSB agents that had been armed by the Russians, but now you also have to fight the Russian regular armed forces as well, as the Ukrainian government and military is awash with Russian spies and informants that are actively telling the Russians where every single like Ukrainian military convoy is going. And so that's actually where a lot of these trust in those early militias came from, was this idea of like, fuck the regular armed forces. It's full of Russian spies and informants. I'm going to go join a militia because I don't have to abide by all these stupid military regulations, and my commanding officer doesn't have a direct line to Putin's bedroom. So I think sorry, what was the original question? I got a little taken.
So the hardliners in Russia,
yeah, but
they say, we've gone.
My point is, if you've had that as what's happened up to this point, you've got that military legacy, and that's everything you've seen, and then you really try to mobilize this force, and you go against Ukraine, and then the real issues start to rear its ugly head: bad maintenance of vehicles, corruption, some people who were just not being properly informed of like what exactly they were going on in an endeavor, underestimating your opponent, meaning you don't have enough resources, thinking it's going to be a lot shorter than it was going to be. So you don't have like, not only you don't have like the men necessary, but you don't have the fuel necessary. You don't have the food necessary. So soldiers have to go and loot. And once they start looting, discipline breaks down. And as discipline breaks down and people are looting, you're not taking objectives. And then you had the spiraling effect of this invasion just becoming more and more of a disaster. But if you're in the middle of Russia and you look endlessly to the west and endlessly to the east, and you see the most massive country on the planet with this massive military legacy and all of these previous military achievements that in a bubble, under the conditions of the moment, were quite, I think, beneficial towards Putin and beneficial towards the Russian state, you can get lost in this world. And I think they really think that the problem is they just weren't mean enough. They didn't go hard enough. And it is true, while maybe if they would have swung harder at the start, they would have done more damage, but they had to not be bought into the delusions of the Ruski Mir, which is kind of part of the Ruski Mir.
If Putin said to the Russian military, I want Ukraine to have no electricity right now, by the end of this week, could the Russian Air Force...
They've tried this so many times. I was in Kharkiv when they were knocking out the city's electricity, and we had to take cover because the building was because the Ukrainians fix it. They blow up the electricity buildings, they blow up the generators, blow up the stuff. Foreign replacements come in, the Ukrainians repair it, and they can get a certain amount of electricity throughout the day. Now, the Ukrainians haven't been able, because the Russians have done this mostly around winter time, and the purpose of it is to like target energy supplies and electricity supplies during the winter. And this is my view. This isn't the official declared policy of the state, even though they say this on Russian state TV all the time. The purpose is to like make them feel the effects of the regime and standing by it, etc. Maybe make more people flee, undercut its economic base. But when they do this, they could succeed in maybe knocking out electricity for 6 hours a day, 12 hours a day, maybe like cycle blackouts. But they haven't been successful in completely knocking it out permanently. And this is due to both the continuation of foreign aid and electricity resources, the fast repairs of Ukrainian maintenance crews who are fixing these places and are getting better as the war goes on at fixing them, because they fixed them. After you've had 3 years of fixing the same electricity systems with a million different pieces from a million different manufacturers, you start to get a little better at it. And so it hasn't been enough to completely break the Ukrainian system.
So what is the current state of the war?
But it's still under immense pressure. And when there are blackouts, there are economic consequences. And it does make people not want to return. And it does convince some people to leave. But, I mean, they haven't been able to completely buckle the system.
I, like many other people, since October 7th, I've been focused on the Middle East and not Ukraine. But what is the current state of the war? I get the sense that they're just sort of stuck in a cycle that's been the same for a while.
Well, the current state of the war is that the Russians are slowly crawling forward on a few fronts. In fact, most fronts, it's either a slow crawl forward, but it's a very slow crawl, or it's still like down south in Zaporizhia. It's still generally locked down. It's still like the same kind of stalemate that it has been. But in the Donetsk region and in parts of the Kharkiv region, they have been slowly crawling forward. They have captured Kurakove. They've captured, of course, Avdiivka way back, like maybe a year and a half ago. And it was with the fall of Avdiivka that ended up kind of barreling towards the fall of a lot of these other small cities that the Ukrainians have lost over the last year and a half. Now recently Vasilino Vasilka, which kind of leads to the Zaporizhia defense system, which is concerning, but also the loss of I'm trying to remember the Volodar, which was a very famous Ukrainian defensive position that killed thousands and thousands of Russians, especially from the 155th Brigade that had tried to assault the position, and the Ukrainians defended it. But eventually, the 72nd, which were one of the main defending units, they just ran out of men to defend it, and they had to back out because the Russians just keep on laying the power when it comes to just assault after assault and assault. And this is a problem for Russia in the long term because they're going to have to get more people to continue this beat of attack because it comes with extremely high casualties. But for the meantime, for the immediate sense, they can continue that pressure. Another pressure, though, that's going to be on them is also the armor. They're using a lot more motorcycles. They're using a lot more go-karts. They're using a lot more like soccer mom vans on the front line because they simply do not have enough armored personnel carriers and tanks to make up the rate of attack to properly protect their troops. And so their troops are having to replace their assault vehicles with civilian vehicles. And this deficit of mechanized equipment and the speed of their loss still being more than they can produce them, or and barely enough with what they're able to take out of the old Soviet storage, which is getting older and older. I'm seeing some tanks that were designed in the Stalin era being used on parts of the front line. That's going to be a downward pressure on their offensives too, because they need armor. Now, North Korea has been able to supplement their supplies, definitely of artillery shells, with some reports indicating that half of the shells being fired on the front line are North Korean at this point, meaning that if it wasn't for the North Koreans, their gas tank probably would have ran out a long time ago. And they are supplementing them with some armored vehicles, but the loss rates are still too high. So in the immediate sense, this gathering of all of Russia's resources and throwing it at the Ukrainian front line is allowing them to crawl forward, is allowing them to capture cities after like months and months of struggle and a lot of casualties. But it hasn't been able to lead to the breakthrough that the Russians have been trying to get forever, because their philosophy is, if we put pressure on every part of the front, and it's just gruesome assaults, eventually this much smaller nation with less men and less resources will eventually buckle. This is like probably the worst strategy from the infantryman's point of view, because it's entirely reliant on the idea of charge. But it could have some success eventually if the Ukrainians don't have the supplies or don't have the manpower, and they've been having problems with recruitment. They've had some problems with desertion this year. I've interviewed multiple soldiers that have since deserted. I interviewed a deserter from the 155th like a few weeks ago. But it hasn't resulted in the breakthrough. And if the Ukrainians continue to get supplies and continue to get manpower, like there's the threat for the Russians of them basically swinging themselves out, where they're putting all this pressure, and then by the end of it, they'll have overextended themselves, and then they won't be able to push any further and might even risk losing gains that they've gotten. That's at least the Ukrainian hope, but that's dependent upon continued support and the idea that that's to assume that this won't be broken up by some negotiation or something.
So the sense, as somebody, a layman like me, is that the war is sort of in a holding pattern, and you're not like on the edge of your seat, like, are they going to take this major city or something?
I mean, the front line is moving more than it has in a while. And the Ukrainians have set some records for the amount of territory they've lost since like basically the start of the war. But it's not anywhere near the idea of this major city is about to fall and this major population settlement is about to fall and it's going to drastically shift the war. But we're getting to the point where the Ukrainians are getting pushed out at more and more out of like southern Donetsk. Like they're about to, if they lose Constantinople, they're basically, that's it. They're out of southern Donetsk, and then it's just northern Donetsk and Kramatorsk, Konstantinivka, and Sloviansk that'll be left of that region to defend, which is definitely concerning for me. And there's a lot of civilians in that area. But like the idea that there's going to be a massive shift in the immediate sense, it doesn't look like that. But also when front lines break down, it can happen quite like first slowly, then fast and quick. So it's impossible to like truly evaluate the status.
Okay. But I
and plus, when we say lull, we also need to remember that the status of the front line is created through constant violent struggle on like every part of the front.
How many people, Russians and Ukrainians, do you think, if you had to guess, die on an average day, let's say, of the last 3 months? How many?
I mean, I don't know, but I mean, it could be. You could, in certain days, it can get really bad. I wouldn't be surprised if you get near 1,000 or past 1,000. On the really bad days.
On average.
I mean, I don't know. If you're just counting deaths, maybe like 300, maybe 350.
Day?
Yeah.
Wow.
Maybe. I mean, because I would say like if we take all the casualties from both sides, it's probably well over 1,000 a day. Or something near 1,000 a day. And then if you just take the people of that died, I'm trying to go like on the smaller side where the majority of them are casualties. I'm 300, 350. But I'm just shooting the dark here.
Wow.
And of course I'm just bundling all of the casualties.
What is this horrifying? People were posting about this drone, but these tweets are not phrased well. So I heard drone hunting. I thought it was like people hunting drones.
Human safari? Is this what you mean? The Kherson human?
What is this?
Well, I just finished my script for a documentary on it. So what's happening in Kherson, which is a city that the Ukrainians took back in late 2022. I was in Mykolaiv during the start of that counteroffensive. That artillery thundered, and I couldn't go to sleep. It was fucking awful. But I mean, it just never stopped. But eventually, they did take back the city. And after they took it back from the Russians and they pushed the Russians back over the river, the Russians started shelling the city. And they kept shelling the city, and they just kind of never stopped. And some of these shells can be directed towards military targets, you can presume. And, there is counter battery fire, but a lot of these places that they're hit are quite impossible to find. It's quite impossible. It's really, really hard to impossible to find a military purpose to it. And with the introduction of drones, and then Russian social media posts, and from all the stories that I've recorded, it seems pretty clear to me that the Russians are deliberately hunting civilians with drones, either for sport or practice. And they're reposting the videos of it like on social media for fun, like all the time. I mean, I think I think it was like 20 or 25 burnt ambulances or something that I was talking to the medical crews about. I documented at least 10 of them. And I mean, I saw the footage of the ambulances being bombed. We're integrating it into the film now. So they'll bomb the civilians, and then when the ambulance crews come, they bomb the ambulance crews. And so certain areas of Kherson, definitely in like areas near the river, have become kind of like no-go zones for medical workers and medical staff, and it's really bad.
If Israeli civilians were killing people in Gaza with drones, like little kids with drones, and then posting video of like, haha, we just killed this Gazan ambulance, and we're posting it on like WhatsApp and Israel, I think that would be like global news. That would go viral. But if it's,
I don't want to do much compare and contrasting. Definitely because there have been examples in the history of that conflict of not stuff being posted on social media, but videos coming out of civilians being sniped and like some really like horrible stuff. But there is a infuriating truth to the fact that this should be a groundbreaking news story. This should be like this is happening on such a consistent basis. And I talked to so many people about it, and I'm only including like some of the more clear descriptions, but there's even more people like off camera that we didn't even get to include in that documentary of just so much testimony about it. It's like an open fact that that if you're a civilian just kind of walking around Kherson, you could hear like a buzz for like 3-4 seconds and then you're gone because an FPV just kind of slapped you upside the head. I talked to one woman, she was coming out of her pharmacy with her medicine. It was just a medical run. She was just going, and I went to the medical center to interview her, and they wouldn't even let me say where the medical center was, where they treat the people, because they're worried that the people who had just been bombed by Russian drones going to get medicine, and then the ambulance crews, going to get people also getting bombed. If they find out where all these people are being treated, they'll also then bomb that location and then kill them as they're being treated. So, but I was talking to her about it, and she was getting bombed as she was going to get her meds and such.
I'm curious how the Ukrainians, how do you feel after October 7th? Just the way, and it's just a brutal truth, the way that the attention just moved. It was just, Ukraine, that's sort of old news.
I can't be angry at people paying attention to the suffering of those either who were killed in the terrorist attack on October 7th or those who have been brutally bombed again and again and again into oblivion until there's nothing but ash in the Gaza Strip. And so I don't want to be, I'm not angry or I'm not bitter about it, but I am bitter about the amount it has affected like fundraising for like assistance for humanitarian support, and now with the freezing of US aid, that's obviously like also going to be a big problem. And I think that when a lot of these atrocities have come out, it just hasn't really, people have forgotten like exactly how brutal it is and how brutal the war continues to be and continues to evolve to be. Because as this technology evolves and the war is just as brutal as ever and there's just as much dehumanization as ever, you can't be that surprised if that leads to these new technologies being integrated into the butchering, which is what happened in Kherson.
How do you feel about, and I saw a lot of this early on, where people would equate Israel in Gaza after October 7th to Russia invading Ukraine. And it doesn't make sense to me that because that it implies that Ukrainians crossed into Russia and like slaughtered.
Well, I understand like when people talk about like civilian casualties and you're talking about like for example proportional response policy and making sure that like you're not like killing a bunch of civilians for no real significant military gain. Like there's real comparisons to be made and like talked about between wars, but when people like do these like sweeping comparisons, I'm not happy about it, because the geopolitical conditions are different, the conditions of the war are different, the histories of the people are different, and so I'm not a huge fan of that. If there's like if Israel's end goal is I'm going to annex Gaza and this is now part of Israel and we will hold this forever and all the people have to leave, then like you could say that that there's a certain like annexation illegal, like maybe a colonial aspect that you can bring alliterations from, but the ways that these wars started are different. The Ukrainians did not launch a big terror attack upon the Russians or like cross the border and did anything like that. The reasons that the Russians used for this incursion are different. The history is different. The war is different. The way it's been conducted is different, both with Gaza being like a small strip of city, isolated on both sides, and how Ukraine has like an interconnected highway system with all of Europe, and like trying to comparing the death tolls is like aggravating, because like the way that the death toll is counted is different, because people will just use like, for example, like either Palestinian Health Agency or they'll use UN data, but then the UN data in reference to Ukraine, it's like 8,000 people have died. 8,000 people have died? No, it's not 8,000 people. It's just that they don't have access to any occupied territory and are not able to count what some estimates have said like 60 to 70,000 dead in Mariupol alone, when they talk about documenting the gigantic mass graves that have accumulated outside of the city. And by the way, I've seen some estimates from Mariupol even higher. But it's impossible to know if it's true or not because you can't really access it, and it's also true you can't access some of the ruins in Gaza. So it's just comparing these sloppily, I think, does more damage than trying to explain either struggle. And so the comparisons need to be limited, they need to be precise, and people need to be careful that you're not just trying to compare struggles to drag attention from one or the other or to diminish people's suffering.
One thing I admire about you is in the online space, people are just so reckless. You know, they'll make assertions. You try to like go by the facts.
I'm much safer. That's why I go to war zones.
You're
not reckless.
I really admire that, and I know that the incentives on YouTube are to go in the other. I'm not blaming YouTube. It's just in the online space.
It's also YouTube's fault, but yeah.
Yeah, but the incentives are to be more extreme, to make all these assertions. I admire that you don't do that. So, but since we basically agree on Ukraine, I'm not saying we necessarily disagree on the Israel stuff, but let's shift to that. We're both on the left. What has been your thoughts on how the left, in inverted commas, the reaction since October 7th?
I mean, that's a very broad.
Very broad.
The left inverted in commas. I mean, it depends, because some parts of the left I'm very proud of. I'm very proud of the activism. I'm very proud of the, some people like making their voices heard and trying to platform voices that weren't getting platforms before. Trying to, educate themselves about,
what
activism? Well, it depends. In some instances, it's a gathering of resources for displaced people, either medical resources or otherwise. It could be trying to raise awareness about, historical occupations, or like, most people don't know about what, like, settlement policy or settlement stuff, what's going on in the West Bank. Let alone if you try to get anything. Well, let's talk about settlement policy in the Golan Heights, or let's talk about like. So people informing themselves has been good. Seeing people fundraise has been good. Seeing people try to make their voices heard, and seeing people, I think, oppose the Biden administration when they have been unbelievably lenient in many instances towards the Netanyahu government, I think is good. I think a lot of it has also been kind of rage bait, personality based bullshit, where either people centering themselves around it, because they're trying to make themselves look like the hero, or they need to, for whatever reason, in order to highlight the struggle of these people, they need to like defend like monsters or like acts of terrorism in order to argue that a people deserve to be, because the left in this country have the difficult position of it immediately filing a terror attack when we have historical trauma from 9/11 to argue, let's not make the solution wipe the Palestinians off the face of the earth, where it seems to be literally the Trump position right now, right? So they have a very difficult position to be in, and it's only made more difficult if you're like, let's defend the guy who went and shot that Israeli dog and then went and shot all these children and went and do that. You don't need to do that. There's no need to go do that. And so when I see like niche commentators on the fringes trying to be like, well, when you talk about justification of this, or well, if you have a party next to a concentration camp, or these types of illustrations or comparisons, trying in some way justify these types of terror to an impressionable audiences, sometimes impressionable audiences that are quite lonely and don't feel like they have much to do with their life, by the way. I think it also doesn't, not only does it not help anybody, it doesn't help Palestinians. I think it actually just helps scare a population away that is already scared by the Palestinian cause, because they, and I'm just being blunt here, they look at protests, they see a bunch of like Arabic lettering on stuff, things being chanted, and then they look over and some of them might, and it's going to be, deceitful. It's going to be right-wingers taking one person out of 10 that's being an asshole and saying like the Jews, but that's what's going to be put out there, and it's going to be horrible. And I think that stuff needs to be largely ostracized. But that's also been hyper-focused on because that's what's going to get the most views on the internet.
So like, let's take Colombia, the encampment people there. So did you see the story? They went to this class on Israeli history. Did you see that? You didn't? Okay. They handed out this. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a boot crushing a Star of David.
This is horrible. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, you could easily if you really wanted to, like, the classic symbol is the flag of the nation state, right? And I understand the Star of David's on that flag. So to us, that symbol, I get it. But there's also a million different symbols on a million different flags that also have to do with, like, other cultural connotations that isn't just tied to the nationality. And I think that if you're an American and you're not somebody who's been fucking only, like, you're in the United States, you're not in fucking Gaza, you're not getting bombed to fucking death like crazy, you're not in fucking Yemen, fucking Hungary, being fucking radicalized by, like, super devout Houthi. You're not these people who don't know, and so they only see the symbol when they associate it with their friends dying in the Gaza Strip. You know that it's a symbol that is related to the Jewish faith. You're not ignorant. You're going to university. You should be smart. You're smart enough to know that, and so there's no excuse. And so when I see stuff like that, like, the classic thing is, put an Israeli flag on it and, like, put a fire on the Israeli flag or something. Like, do the classic, like, I'm going to do the edgy flag burning if you really want to go do that. But by doing that, it seems like you're just targeting Jewish people. You're not targeting a criticism of a nation state, which has always been the fear of a lot of people when they hear people use words like Zionist. Is what they really mean is to say Jew, but with a nice filter. And doing stuff like this just kind of makes those people look like they're right. And I think, and sadly, in some instances, they are.
So I'm trying to see what to make of the protest movement that came about after October 7th. So this is from, I think, outside Colombia, but listen to what they say. There's been this chant, we don't want no 2 states, we want 48, which is basically we're not interested in Israel existing. We want all of the land. I have not heard a lot of talk about 2-state solution in any of the protests. Have you?
I mean, I don't think that there's been, like, necessarily, like, concrete, here is the peaceful solution. Most of the demands have been end weapon sales, end weapon shipments, or generally immediately focused. Right. Not many of them have been focused, and I make that make sense because it's the easiest demands to unite around as a protest movement is the immediate ones. Get the aid in, stop the bombs and the violence. So I think as a coalition, since there's so many different Arab Americans in different factions and the people of different backgrounds coming together, they've just decided to, generally speaking, stick to the immediate demands. But yeah, if you were to extend it to, okay, what's the final solution to this conflict? How do you, who gets this land, who gets that land? It's probably going to be a lot more hazy, because you're also going to have people who, of course, are not going to want any solution where Israel exists. But I mean, like, that's also just, it's the world we live in. And so Israel exists. There's tons of people who have been born there, and no other state. And I think that to even attempt to bring about that outcome would be so much more destructive for everybody in the region and the world, both for its atomic implications and for the moral implications of the removal of all those people and the amount of violence that would be necessary to carry out something like this. So it's something that I think is not serious, and I think is largely going to be kind of tied to kind of a middle, largely is going to be tied to kind of a middle income apparatchik kind of class in the United States, because it's just not like it's not a actionable demand pushing Israel into the sea. It's never going to happen.
Do you think the Palestinians want a state? I know obviously it's hard to generalize, but let's just do it. Do you think they want a state next to Israel?
I mean, I don't think either of them want a state next to each other, to be frank. I don't think they want to live with each other. I don't think they want to be near each other. But I mean, they have to get to know to live. They have to figure out how to live next to each other.
The Israelis offered a state.
But do you think Israelis right now want a Palestinian state?
No, but
okay. So neither of these people want a state for the other.
But they did offer it many times
under certain conditions. Yeah, there was states offered that the terms were not agreeable to like the Palestinian leadership, probably better terms that would be offered now, but we're still not agreeable due to like issues like the right of return, which is like a Rubik's Cube in and of itself. But I don't see many strides being made in that, or giant amounts of compensation being made for those who have lost their homes. But like, yes, there was a deal offered in that time period. I think during the Clinton administration was probably the closest we've got to a deal, but we haven't gotten anywhere closer really since then. And I think that the current leadership in Israel has zero interest in a deal. I don't think the current administration in Israel has any interest in making a Palestinian state, or there being a creation of a Palestinian state.
No, but who do you think in the history of the 100 years, who has been obstructing a settlement of this, do you think?
I mean, you want me to like say, is it the Jews or the Muslims?
No,
you want me to say, is it the Jews or the
Muslims?
Muslims?
Not the Muslim. I'm not.
It was the Hindus all along.
I'm not saying the Muslims.
No. I get what you want. You want me to say it was the Palestinians who?
No, I'm not.
Or the Israelis? No. I fucking you see you little baby motherfucker. No, it's fine. It's fine. I think a lot of it comes to individual personalities. Like, I don't know how much like the assassination of like certain officials could have like changed history. People talk about like what could have changed here, what could have changed there. Sometimes it's due to factions not being willing to compromise when they much more should have, like Yasser Arafat, or it has to do with people not being willing to compromise at all because they're just principally against it. Like now, let's say Netanyahu is somebody who now the longest serving prime minister in Israeli history and doesn't want any creation of a Palestinian state. Not only means that under his administration, that perspective, there's like no chance, I think, really for a long-term solution. But it also means that any administration that follows his line, the line that he's definitely helped normalize and he's been pushing for the longest administration in Israeli history, is definitely going to be a problem. So I mean, it's like I'm not going to point to any one person and say they're the biggest objector, they're the biggest. I can't. I'm also not that much of an expert on it to really say that this is the biggest person to blame. You want to know who I blame?
Who?
I blame whoever it was who decided to allow that strip of land to have that many holy sites.
Let's talk about Hassan. You know, he says ridiculous stuff. What did he say? He said NATO is like Nazi Germany. I mean,
did he say he did?
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, he compared NATO. No, he did.
No,
he compared NATO to Nazi Germany.
Yeah, reforming NATO is like reforming the Third Reich, which is a good take, actually, because lo and behold, a lot of the Third Reich guys may have made their way into NATO. Just saying. NATO, Nazi arming and training organization. Yeah, I guess what we did with NATO was we reformed the Nazis and turned them into like Nazi plus.
Oh, I just don't want to believe it, so I'm gonna not believe it.
Yeah, but this I call it the angels versus demons framing of Israel Palestine is become increasingly popular on this sort of younger left.
Well, but okay,
Yeah.
look, let me. Okay,
Yeah.
I have made videos and content critiquing people who've whitewashed this before, so I'll just kind of put the stance here. In the United States, the Israel lobby has a significant amount of power when it comes to dictating policy in Israel. I think when people say like the Israel controls America, no, bullshit. But they do have influence. I also think that America's religious connotations and religious leanings has also made a big political support base for Israel, not only within the Jewish community, but within a lot of the Christian community as well. I also think that American Israel has had now a historic alliance and relationship that has, and Israel has worked to develop those ties with America, knowing how valuable America is, with a lot of trips and tours by congressmen. I mean, my congressman, Steny Hoyer, he was the man who organized all the trips for American congressmen to come to Israel, to see Israel, visit the wall, you know, and they get, you know, do the whole thing. And so for me, like, the Israeli position has many spokespeople in the United States, has many different, I would say, powerful friends in the United States. And that has been backed up by policy. Where the Palestinian position, both due to the history of its geopolitical leanings and due to our perspective on terrorism, due to our experiences as a country, and the tactics that have been sometimes used by the Palestinian resistance, whether it was the Fedayeen, whether it was the PLO, whether it was the whoever the fuck, right? Whether it was just angry fucking dude about losing his home, whoever it was, right? Has led to us to get into this position. And so when you're a young person being like told that our country is providing all these weapons to not only continue an occupation, but probably now, when we're listening to how Trump's talking about, possibly like expand an occupation. And we've always kind of had this position, and you're not hearing this really a lot on a lot of the mainstream sources. And you know that it doesn't have a lot of powerful friends. It becomes very easy to just take the counter flag and charge full ahead and not try to find any nuance of the position. Now, I would say that in the American political spectrum, I would probably be considered pretty pro-Palestine. But I've tried my best to like apply as much nuance to my position as possible. I think
you're very reasonable. Yeah, you're very nuanced.
But I'm sympathetic to these people because I imagine looking at this media landscape, looking at the political landscape, looking at the current status of the war, seeing that it's still going on, and just being like, I need to get as much information as possible to throw forward to inform people about this. And then you just also take some information that wasn't particularly nuanced or didn't include a full picture. Like it's really easy for me to see this.
What is disturbing to me though is I literally had someone on Twitter tell me in this account, Poor Dart, I think their name is, but they say they're on the left, saying to me that the term ZOG, Zionist Occupational Government, which was created by explicit neo-Nazis.
I've never heard anybody use that word that wouldn't fucking give a Roman salute immediately after.
This account, who says they're on the left, was saying it's not anti-Semitic. And they even said to say it's anti-Semitic is anti-Semitic.
Wow.
And that is, if you had told me before October 7th that people on the left would be defending the term Zog, it would have. So it's very depressing the way that Ethan Klein and Hila Klein have been treated since October 7th and demonized. I agree. Disappointing.
I agree. Definitely with people like the idea that Israel controls America or Zionists control America. Because you create a boogeyman, you don't create like an actual like political caucus. You're not describing this in like realistic terms. You're describing this in the terms of like storybooks where you're it makes me very uncomfortable. I also just don't know how much of this it's the bubbles of the places that I travel on the internet and how much of it's like amongst the wider left, because like the DNC wouldn't even allow a Palestinian person to give their perspective at the conference, right? And that's like supposed to be the left-wing, quote-unquote, political party in the United States. Now, people can say, well, that's the DNC. That's not like popular culture on the internet. And that's true. But like these perspectives, at least on the left, don't really have institutional power. But when it's bad, it's gross, and I think it should be spat on, that type of stuff, in order to make sure it doesn't get any institutional power within the party, which will not only be painful, which would not only dictate bad policy, but it would also be very bad for the party. It's the type of stuff that could, I don't want to talk about Jeremy Corbyn in the United Kingdom, but you got to be careful about these types of things, especially because America's, generally speaking, pretty friendly towards Jews. And I don't think that perspective is going to change. And I think an anti-Semitism scandal in the Democratic Party is not something you want. So I agree that it needs to be spat on. But then you look over at the Republican Party and like you've got their people saying like bounce the rubble. Well, Trump saying kill the families of the terrorists. If they're terrorists, kill their families. That's how you conduct war, right? He's now talking about an ethnic cleansing campaign amongst the entirety of the Gaza Strip so he can put his fucking stupid casinos along the strip with a good oceanfront view. Who would have thought that Trump, the developer, would immediately get greedy when he sees oceanfront property?
I was thinking about should I even bring it up, but it's it's so crazy, and it seems like something that will just be like forgotten. He's just gonna forget it, but I don't even know what to say. What he wants to annex Gaza, it's just crazy. Yeah, but do you know the TikToker Rathbone by any chance? The communist guy?
Yeah, I've did he block me? He doesn't like me.
Yeah. But you know him, right?
Yes, I'm familiar with him.
Yeah. It scared me. Do you know he's just an open anti-Semite now?
What do you mean like an open
like
anti-Semite?
he makes videos and he's like, he talks about the tiny hats, which is this neo-Nazi term for Jews.
The tiny hats is very bad.
No, but it's beyond that. He's like, he did this video and it was like, I'm the tiny hat guy and I get to control society and nobody gets to call me out. Like,
Yeah, no, did you just say he just sounds like a neo-Nazi?
I hereby declare that anyone who wears a tiny hat will receive special privilege in our society. We are the Tiny Hat Club, and the people of Tiny Hat Club live. Any questions? Yes, what about the people that don't wear hats? They are all criminals, they will be subordinate to the tiny hatted people, and they will be persecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Okay, well, what if you do wear a hat, but the hat isn't tiny? Illegal. Why? Because wearing other hats besides a tiny hat is literally the definition of tiny hatophobia, and that is not to be tolerated.
Yeah. I mean, like he doesn't like to put much thought into what he talks about. If you listen to how he talks about Ukraine, talks about any of this, he likes to be given a. There are some people, and it's really, as somebody who likes putting together puzzles or stuff, likes finding the picture, like finding all the pieces of lore and like trying to find the big picture. But there's some people who just want to be given the fucking bullet points and told that this is the truth. This aligns with your already preordained beliefs. It's really easy to just attach this to what you already believe instead of having to readjust your foundations or adjust your perspective. It's so easy, and that's what he does. So I mean, when I listen to him talk about the war in Ukraine, it's just like he just prints out like whatever the Russian government puts on their fact sheets, and he just repeats it. And that's fine if that's your grift or whatever, but like don't appear in my feed, please.
What do you think Israel should have done after October 7th?
Oh, fuck me, man. I mean, they have to get the hostages back. They have to garner leverage to get the hostages back. So I think that there was always going to be some sort of a military operation. Exactly what would be, if the goal would be the complete obliteration of Hamas, or a deal that would get you the hostages back to then deal with Hamas at a later date. That would be the question, because after a year and a half, it doesn't really look like Hamas is gone. It doesn't look like they're any closer to being completely wiped off the face of the earth. I think that they're weaker. I think that they've lost munitions. I think that they've probably lost funding. But I mean, Anthony Blinken recently indicated that they've basically been able to recruit the majority of their rank and file back. And so the question, I think, is, do you destroy an organization like Hamas or find a deal with an organization like this? To destroy an organization like Hamas, do you do it through one big explosive war, or do you do it by a death of 1,000 cuts in different operations to try to slowly bring them down instead of an explosive military operation? Do you try? These are answers I do not have for you.
Yeah,
I also don't know if you make the deal to get the hostages out. I mean, I would think, for me, my main goal, immediately speaking, would be to get the hostages out. And whatever is necessary to get the hostages out, immediately speaking, would probably be made. And so I think some people think, oh, so you just concede to whatever they want. Well, no. If you would carry out a military operation and you would say, give us the hostages back, we'll trade you some. If you don't, and then we'll just have to keep fighting because we're not going to abandon our people. Every nation state would have to do that, but there doesn't need to be any underlying implications of, also maybe we'll annex the Gaza Strip, also maybe we're going to continue settlement expansion in the West Bank. You need to concentrate on the destroying terrorism element, not allowing radicals in your government to subvert and blur the objectives of the operation to include, well, maybe, Gaza doesn't need to really exist anymore. Or, well, maybe, West Bank just needs to be Judea and Samaria internationally recognized now. Or maybe, we actually need to now start bombing Syria and invading Syria after Assad was overthrown. And we could have blown up his chemical weapons at any point. We just chose not to. Like, there's other decisions that that I think, because of Netanyahu's political leanings and the fact that I think he's a fucking ideologue, and the people around him are even bigger ideologues, that is blurring the mission objective, and also leading to, I think, also, to be blunt, unnecessary cruelty in some instances, just due to the ways that I don't think that they care, particularly with the new administration in power, how the war is conducted. As long as it's not bad enough that they'll literally lose their support base from the United States, which they've found so far that they have a decent amount of leash.
Do you have any thoughts on the Hassan Ethan Klein drama?
Honestly, I've not watched the Content Nuke. I've not watched any of that because my house burned down.
Oh, yes, of course. I'm sorry. So I want to talk about, I'm impressed by, I guess you're a streamer, or you do that. And, I
guess I do that too.
Yeah. But I am really impressed by it, because I was watching your show, and like, you have the live chat and you have the comments coming in. It's like, I'm such a pussy. I'd be too scared of having a live chat, because they could turn on you and stuff.
Oh, so people come in and they're like, you get a slur here and there, or you'll get like some like weird comment every once in a while. But like, you get kind of just used to it after kind of exposure.
So I wanted to ask you about starting your channel, and the one thing I think about, have you ever started a Twitter space on Twitter? Yeah.
I tried it like a few times.
Okay. Yeah. Like, well, you wouldn't be a good example because you have a lot of followers. But for instance, like, if you're just sort of a regular account like me, like Daniel11, if you want to find me, I tried doing it a few times, and they play the music when you start. And just waiting and having no one show up for like 3 minutes, you feel like such a loser. And like, my skin, I started sweating, and it's like, oh boy, this is a lot harder than I thought to put yourself out there.
And then the thing is, but the best part is when somebody finally comes in, you're like, oh, hey, and then they jump out immediately.
Exactly. There's all sorts of social psychology, because the one person comes, and then if you've ever been the one person, then you feel guilty about leaving. Yeah. But I'm curious, tell me about when you were starting your channel. Like, I must imagine there must have been something like that the first time you did the live chat, maybe.
Oh, well, I mean, yeah. I went on some shows like Destiny's and Bosch's and a few others before I did mine. And so my first stream, I had, I think maybe like 70 something viewers, like on average. And then later I ended up, I think it like stabilized around 30 average for a bit before then going up. So I never really had a completely silent chat room. I've never had that experience, at least streaming. I remember like having an experience like that, playing like some like video games where you're just one person in a lobby and you got to wait for somebody else to get in there. And you're like, yeah, I've had that experience happen like that, but not through streaming.
How do you deal? I would worry, especially on Israel, Palestine, about having a live chat. I'd worry about being.
Oh, I don't even like when they go at it about it. I just try to concentrate on my because I have ADHD and it's really hard to concentrate on like multiple things at the same time sometimes for me. So when I'm reading chat and I'm trying to go on a spiel, it can really throw me off. So I almost like I'll segment times out almost sometimes to be like, oh, okay, chat, let's take some questions.
But I'd be worried about it influencing me. That I would get scared, that they would go after me.
What advice would I give?
No, but how do you deal with not being influenced by the chat?
I mean, I guess personally, I think about it like, I don't know. I only got like one life, right? Then I die, and then the worms eat me. And so if I'm going to be here once, and I only got one shot at this, I should just try to be genuine about what I feel and believe. And if people don't like it, they don't have to like it. But as long as they, I think, see me naturally getting to the conclusions that I'm getting at, and that they'll see me admit when I'm wrong and try to naturally evolve, then hopefully they'll they'll take it in good faith if I get something wrong or if I mess something up. Whether if somebody gives me backlash, people are always going to give backlash, whether you're right or whether you're not right. Because a lot of people have some pretty crazy views out there. You can't make everybody happy, but you can at least try to be genuine.
Let's talk about Vosh for a second. I think he's on the domestic front when it comes to right wing. I really admire. He calls out the Nazis. Really, I admire him. He's very vigilant about that. But then I'll see him say stuff like this, and I just don't know what to make of it. So I want to say this is like 3 weeks after October 7th.
Mm-hmm. What about people who say that Israel has a right to exist? It's an idiotic, thought terminating statement. It's designed to shut down conversation. What you could say that about anything anywhere. What did Germany have a right to exist when it was getting invaded from the west and from the what does that mean? Do you mean should every single ethnically German person be killed? Well, no, that seems a bit extreme. Does that mean Germany in its current form should continue to exist? Well, if they're getting invaded from the west and from the east, that probably means that it's the end of World War II. So no, they should not continue to exist in their current state. What does that mean? Does Israel have a right to exist? Hey, here's the real answer. No nation has a right to exist. What do you mean? Right. People have rights. What do you mean? Israeli officials have the power, the military force, whatever, the diplomatic connections to keep that from happening for both groups by engaging in inflammatory local policy and geopolitical policy, which keeps them being on the wrong side of history and locally. It means they'll never form alliances. Israel was literally, Netanyahu was literally working to build rapport with neighboring Arab countries. And what's happened? What's happened? Now all of those relationships have been tanked. Things with Iran have gotten worse. Things with Lebanon have gotten worse. Things with Qatar have gotten worse. Things with Egypt have gotten worse. And why? Because they can't help themselves. They want Palestinian blood.
I mean, this is 3 weeks after October 7th. They can't help themselves. They want Palestinian blood. Mm-hmm. First of all, it's that's the blood libel trope. I can't believe he's not aware of that. But also, to say 3 weeks.
I don't know. Okay, blood libel. I think you're kind of stretching it.
He says they can't. This is 3 weeks after October 7th.
Yeah, but I don't think it has anything to do with blood libel. I think he has to be the Israeli nation state right now cannot help themselves. They want to brutalize the Palestinians. Is how I read that. I don't read that as a reference to blood libel.
No, they want their hostages back. They can't help themselves. They want their. I know.
Perspective. I'm saying I don't think it's blood libel. I think calling it blood libel is you're reaching.
They can't help themselves. They want Palestinian blood. I don't know, but but this is. I mean, he says in that clip, he says the only reason there's not peace, there's not happiness, it's because of Israel and stuff. I mean, it's just.
Well, look, I think
no nuance.
Well, that statement right there is not nuanced. And I agree that at time when he says, does Israel have a right to exist? Well, I believe people have rights to exist. I understand what he's trying to get at. I think he's being kind of pedantic. For me, when people say, does Israel have a right to exist? My problem with this conversation, and I don't think that's never a bad question to ask in a certain situation, but that's not a question that's being debated right now. No, there's not is Tel Aviv going to be pushed into the ocean? Is that going to happen? That might happen among some niche political apparatchik class people, a few people, but it's not a serious conversation that people think is going to happen. And so I understand that's my frustration with how much attention that question gets. But in certain situations, if you're talking to that apparatchik class, then yes, you have to ask the question of, do you believe, and this is how I would communicate it to, attuned to Vosh's people have rights to exist. The people in Israel, largely speaking, want a nation state that would be protective towards the Jews due to their historic persecution. Many of them have been born there and feel historic attachment there, not only because of their religious scripture, but because now many of them were born there and grew up there and know there. And the idea that they're just a bunch of recent Polish immigrants is mostly bullshit. There is truth that Jews do come, but a lot of these people are descended from the actual refugees. But I think that has a right to exist. Those people have a right to exist there. I would agree that the current incarnation of how the occupation works in the West Bank, or what
Right.
the Israeli government wants to do, possibly in the Gaza Strip. Those incarnations of the Israeli state don't have a right to exist. So I think the argumentation is like one incarnation of a representation of the people should exist. And because he's a libertarian socialist, he's expressing it this way because he's talking the foundational nation state, when I think to communicate to people who are not within our internet subgroup with programming socks on, I think that we need to communicate more like, of course, the Israelis deserve a country. They deserve a place that they could be called home, but so do the Palestinians. Like, I think that it's much
not,
easier to
of course.
communicate this message.
It's not, of course. A lot of people, they want to wipe out Israel. And
and he has it. I mean, like, in Vosh has his historical statement. I mean, the easier thing to go with. I don't know why you led with this one and not the one with the nuke. I feel like that's a lot. I think that's just easier. You don't know when he said to nuke Tel Aviv.
Oh no, tell me.
Yeah, you should look that up next time you want get somebody.
What did he say? What did he say?
You can Google it. Don't worry. You can get him next time.
I'm not trying to get him. It pains me,
man.
It pains me because I like what Vosh says on a lot of stuff. Like, for instance, when I knew people were going crazy? When they said, Loner Box, right?
Yeah.
Who's the, most mild-mannered, reasonable guy, right? And I'd see people saying, he's a genocidal freak.
It's just because they don't, I don't even, put, I know this is weird, but I don't even it's so hard for me to put into emotion to hearing these statements anymore. Cause I know why you don't like Loner Box. You don't like Loner Box because your streamer doesn't like Loner Box. And because your streamer doesn't like Loner Box, the interpretation of his position now, because either he knows a streamer that you hate, or he has said things about a streamer you do not like, or your streamer doesn't like him. Now he has to be literally the worst incarnation of his position possible, instead of something that's nuanced and maybe semi-respectable or understandable due to the conclusions that they've come to. They have to be the demon, because that's the only way you can justify freaking out or flipping out at them, or not even being able to go reasonably listen to their perspective and take it in. You got to put your crowd in the bubble, man. If you don't keep them in the bubble, then they might go over and listen to the guy and be, oh shit, that's like a person, right? I'm sure, if I listen to Hassan sometimes, I'll be clear, Hassan fucking hates my guts. He's called me a war tourist pervert. He doesn't like that I asked Ukrainians what they thought of his commentary. He doesn't want to talk to Ukrainians on his stream. I'm very critical of that. If he can have that dude from Yemen on, considering the type of crazy commentary he's put out on social media, then I think he can listen to the perspective of some people who are facing the largest invasion in Europe since World War II, and currently the bloodiest war on the planet, where the lines of Europe can be redrawn. I feel like listening to those perspectives kind of matters, but I'm not going to pretend that Hassan's not a human being and he's some fucking demon. I saw him do that fireman interview with those prisoner firefighters in California. I really respect that immensely. That's the type of stuff I really wish Twitch streamers would do more of. I want to see him do more of that. He, of course, has raised a decent amount of money for charity, but I just think that a lot of the ways that he's approached the news, I think, has either been irresponsible in coverage, and I think that I disagree with him deeply when it comes to Ukraine, and I think he needs to open up his perspective to the Ukrainian people more than just bringing on some English teacher who was there for a year or two, right?
We're both Democrats. Why do you think there's more energy and activism in the movement, is basically the anti-Israel movement, than the movement for universal health care? I say the movement, but the fact is there actually isn't any movement. But why do you think that is, and what do you think about that?
I mean, the universal, I was a big Bernie guy. I really believe we needed a complete transformation of our healthcare system. I saw how it affected my family. I've seen how it's affected others. It's absolutely terrible. Not only the amount of people who are bankrupted by our healthcare system, but the amount of people who die because they refuse to get healthcare because they're afraid of how it'll affect their families, how if they'll be able to afford their daughter's Christmas presents, they'll be able to afford putting a good amount of food on the table, or daycare, or their medical treatment. And I mean, these are decisions that I don't believe anybody should be making in the richest country on the world, when it's supposed to be a land of opportunity. But if you're born and then you are immediately thrown into poverty because you have sickness from birth, and there's not really anything your family can do but just shovel everything out of their pockets, that doesn't feel like an opportunity to me. That doesn't feel like providing them with opportunity. I want to provide people with opportunity. So I'm really big on healthcare transformation in this country. But I mean, the Biden administration talked about a public option. He was not for Medicare for all. And I was okay with public option as a step forward, but we saw no movement on it. And I mean, we didn't have the legislative majorities for it, so I understand that. But we needed to build an agenda that we could deliver to the people that isn't like $25,000 down payment for first-time home buyer. We need something that's transformative for society that can show a different path forward. And the majority of Americans have answered many times that they'd be willing to pay more in taxes if it meant that every American got health care. That Americans truly do believe in this, something that we could win on, and the Republicans under no circumstances can try to outflank us on this issue because of their economic philosophy. But it's not the message we ran on. It's not the message that was like the big delivery message. We were able to run on some changes, but it's always like with addendums, with example for the insulin price caps, or but we can talk about those changes, but we need transformative vision. And I don't think that we delivered that transformative vision when we were talking about healthcare.
No, but why is there universal healthcare is so popular, like you're saying, right? I mean, for instance, a guy just got.
But also, like, let's just say the war's current is going on now. It's something you have to act on currently. I think that's why that's got the focus right now. I think we really fucked up a lightning in the bottle moment when it came to Bernie Sanders and the healthcare movement. I mean, even if Bernie lost, Hillary could have adopted some of those policies and ran with it as a like, okay, obviously there was something here that excited the base. Look at those fundraising numbers. Look at the mobilization of, let's see if we can. But there was a lot of arrogance in the Hillary campaign, a lot of like, it's her turn type philosophy from the people there. So I hope that moment comes up again, because I think once people's bills are difficult and they're getting hit with these medical bills, people are constantly reminded of this. This is not an issue that like goes away. It's constant. So I think that there's always the opportunity for us to build to that moment. But I do think that that moment of outrage and attention and the focus that Bernie brought to it, which is the most valuable thing in our democracy today, is focus. And he had it. We've lost that focus. And I can't tell you how to regain it.
Well, it's just so disappointing to see that DSA, rather than doing activism on universal health care.
Well, I don't know. I'm not involved in DSA enough to know if they do that, but I think they still care about these things.
They still care about it, but they're spending an awful lot of time banning Zionists, which would be like 80 to 90% of Jews, including Bernie Sanders. Just constant focus on I don't think universal health care versus destroying Israel. I don't think it's the popularity.
More, obviously, I think the first one is a much easier pitch to make to all Americans than the second one. Right. I also think that the second one, while of course there's moral stances to make, and there's good activists that could be inspired by that moment that you could bring into your organizations, and you can see that as like long-term organization building. At the end of the day, when you pitch into the rest of the American public, foreign affairs issues is just not what you need to be spending the majority of your time as a movement trying to do what you're doing. And I'm saying that as somebody who covers foreign affairs issues. Okay, I'm saying this at my own disadvantage. I'm just saying that most Americans care about domestic issues more than they care about foreign affairs issues. And so you can have that. You can even have it as a big theme if the moment calls for it, but you have to be dominated by the things that are addressing people's domestic concerns at home, because you can only have a strong American foreign policy abroad if you have a strong domestic policy.
Okay, I want to end on the Democrats. Let's talk about Kamala. Do you remember this? Her first interview?
Oh, God. I don't remember her first. I mean, you mean her first interview since announcing that she was going to be...
Yeah.
Okay. No, I think I remember, but I mean, I watched a few of them, so I can't remember it by...
Let me remind you.
History.
Okay.
The voters are really eager to hear what your plans are. If you are elected, what would you do on day one in the White House?
Well, there are a number of things. I will tell you, first and foremost, one of my highest priorities is to do what we can to support and strengthen the middle class. When I look at the aspirations, the goals, the ambitions of the American people, I think that people are ready for a new way forward, in a way that generations of Americans have been fueled by hope and by optimism. I think, sadly, in the last decade, we have had in the former president someone who has really been pushing an agenda and in an environment that is.
Yeah, and so she just rambles, and so Dana Bash asks her
again. She needs to. What she needs to do is when she's asked that, she needs to be like, "We're going to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. To do this to address the immediate concerns of the people," and then you go into your spiel about introducing yourself. The problem she had is that there was no primary. She didn't get to introduce herself to the public the way that you would with the normal primary. She was given the very difficult task that no other candidate's ever been given, where you both have to define yourself as a person, because I know it's weird, but some people just can't vote for people if they just know their policies or whatever. They actually have to be like, I'd have lunch with them or whatever. I don't care about that as much. I mean, it's better to know that you're like, if you're a more human person, I guess I will trust you more. I think it's a very human thing. But I mean, like, I'm much more policy and administrative and like tinkering with the system like focus than I am about this personality bullshit. But that matters to people. And like trying to define yourself as like, I was just a middle class woman from a like an immigrant mother who's just fighting for the American dream. Like you do need to do that. But when you give like one kind of, we're going to do what's necessary for the middle class, that's vague. That can mean anything. And then you go into that spiel, you look like you're not giving a solid answer. You're not giving people an immediate pitch, which you should be. All you're saying is that you like middle class people, which every politician has said forever. You need to be coming out of this like a fucking cannon with like a quick like fucking elevator pitch. And it sounds like they never really got an elevator pitch for the agenda. And like on a first day basis too, this is the type of thing where you could really break yourself for the Biden administration, because even if you don't want to separate yourself that much from Biden, because Biden has anointed you as the nominee and he didn't need to do that, we could have maybe had a very short, violent process and we would have had King Gavin Newsom or whatever, who knows? But he did do that. And so I understand that she didn't want to, but if you just show the image of snapping out of malaise, snapping out of malaise through quick action, the way Trump was always like almost like offering a break with the status quo, even though it's a return to the Trumpian chaotic status quo. I think that maybe it would have been more compelling as a break. Maybe not a break with like the establishment of the Biden like team, because she's still going to bring over a lot of those people, but a break with the old man Biden, the good old boy, and then move on to somebody who's not good, but not an old boy. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. What's so amazing is Dana Bash tries to rescue her because she just rambles, and then she like asks it again, gives her another chance, and here's what she does.
And I think people are ready to turn the page on that.
So what would you do day one?
Day one, it's going to be about, one, implementing my plan for what I call an opportunity economy.
My opportunity economy agenda. What the fuck is that? It's just DC bullshit. It means nothing. When I hear Democrats say that she did,
look, earlier I talked about, I like the idea of an opportunity economy. I like the idea that America is about, no, let's shut the, let me pitch it. Okay. Let me pitch it. I like the idea. Let me flip around my chair so I can pitch it like a real salesperson. Okay. I like the idea of an America where even if you're sick, even if you didn't come up to parents who had, a fantastic background with, the best colleges and all the money and all the upbringing, that no matter where you are, if you apply yourself and you follow the rules, that you can build a future for yourself here, that America is a field of opportunities. And producing that opportunity economy means making protections for people with health care who have health disadvantages. It means doing the things that are necessary to help people get a house for the first time, which is part of her economy. I understand where she was going for it. I think it's very American. But if you just say opportunity economy and help the middle class, it's just a bunch of slogans until you got to open with here's the things that I know you guys like. Let me associate it with my bigger thing.
Yeah.
Right? Exactly. What she needed to do is not the problem with it isn't the opportunity economy. The problem is that she had the buns with nothing in the middle.
She had
as a pitch in this, and she needs to make a sandwich and hand it to somebody quick in an elevator, quick elevator pitch.
She was running on a tax credit. It was like, if you qualify for this, then if you're in the right.
Felt like, you know what it felt a little bit like sometimes? What was his name from it was the 2020 primary. He was a bald man. I believe he was from Delaware, or he was from.
I know who you're talking about.
I forget what his name was. I was like, was it Delaney? Maybe something?
Delaney. Yes.
Yeah, Delaney.
Yes.
It felt like Delaney policy. It felt like if Delaney kind of took over Harris immediately once the campaign
I think she
started.
was just like Hillary. Because let me ask you this. I think politics is kind of simple. It's about, what do I get if I vote for you? So let me ask you a question, Dylan. If Hillary Clinton got elected in 2016, what was she going to do for you?
I can't remember.
Yeah, exactly. And what was Kamala going to do for you?
Credit for first-time home buyers.
Oh, okay.
And I think that, building on Obamacare.
Oh my! They don't even say building on it. Now they just say protecting Obamacare.
There was some building upon the successes. It's something like that.
And when I see people talk about her running again, to me,
we need to stop coddling people as if it's about the personality and not about winning. It's about winning. What elections are about, you know what they're about? They're about winning. They're about winning the election. That's the purpose. It's not about making sure that you have the storybook ending for your little hero because you've decided to become friends with a political figure. If the political figure isn't the best person to win an election, then they shouldn't be the person running in that election. I don't care about seniority, which the Democratic Party has a huge obsession about. I don't care about whether or not we need to keep rewarding these losers. And every time somebody loses an election, we decide we're going to make them DNC chair. That's what we did with a lot of our losers. It was like, oh, I'm sorry, you can just be in charge of the whole party after losing. It's not a good spirit to have.
But I constantly hear people say she did a great job. She was in a tough circumstance, but she was a great candidate. I'm like, watch these clips.
I mean, she wasn't. Look, I understand. She was an extremely difficult position. And I think if we had a full primary and she was able to divide herself more from Biden, more time to get herself across people, maybe she could have beaten Trump. But the problem isn't could we have gotten her over the finish line? Trump has so many flaws as a candidate. If we're talking about somebody's a good candidate or a bad candidate, if somebody's a really good fucking candidate, you could have curb stopped Trump in this election. But it was the circumstances that she was placed upon and her being maybe at best a middling candidate that led to us losing.
I mean,
I think.
If you watch the clips of her on Colbert, this interview,
she got a little better with time, but she was not trained in the 4 years Biden was in office to run. She wasn't put in the spotlight. She was kept in the background. And that's why she had such a low approval rating. I think in large part was because nobody knew what the fuck she was doing because she wasn't in the spotlight. The only times I can remember is when she replaced Biden at the Ukraine Peace Summit, which Biden should have been the one to go to anyway. So it was when Biden couldn't be there. It was when she was gone, which is, usually the role of the vice president, but nobody got to know her or see her initiatives or see anything. And so they had a low approval rating because the only thing people were talked about, definitely when it came to right-wing radio, was that she was the border czar. So the only attachment she got a little bit was the border, which certainly didn't help her. She was not prepared to run. Maybe if Biden had won this election and in 2028, after 4 years of knowing that Biden wasn't going to run, they could have prepared her more. But it's all winning an election isn't about winning the election under the best of circumstances. It's about making such a hardy and flexible candidate that they can win in a fucking thunderstorm.
She was and I'm surprised nobody talked about this. She was one. If you ask me what Democrat is least capable of winning the Rust Belt, I probably would have said Kamala Harris. because she has no. I don't think she's ever given a speech on outsourcing ever, and one of her closing ad campaigns was tariffs or tax. And it's like, of course you lost the Rust Belt because you're now the pro-China free trade party.
I mean, look, I think going after tariffs to some capacity, I think she should have gone after his tariff policy because the tariff policy wasn't competent. Because she should have been like, look, it's not a tariff on American-made everything. It's a tariff on everything. You're gonna fucking grow coffee beans in Vermont. You're gonna go there's certain ways that she could have gone about attacking it. But yeah, she was already not really making those inroads. I think they might have just written off those voters almost. I actually don't know if they did, because their campaign blitz was everywhere, but they didn't advertise to them in that way. No.
So, do you agree with me that
the union endorsements did not pan out towards union membership votes, which I think might have been what they were banking on, partially at least.
I have a problem when people say the Democratic Party needs to go left or move to the center. I think that's too generalized. It's more about individual issues. I think the Democrats need to move left on health care.
Yes.
For certainly.
Absolutely.
On some of the cultural stuff, they definitely have to stop with the Latinx stuff and the weird language stuff that alienates people. When they say, like, I want to center that, or all the stupid language that sort of upsets people. So do you have any thoughts on who would be good in 2028?
It's too early to say. I mean, I don't know. It's too early to say. People say AOC, but I think AOC needs to climb up the party more.
No.
I think AOC is doing good work where she is right now, and that she needs to continue to do good work where she is right now and continue to climb up the party. I don't think that immediately once you have any left-winger with any amount of popularity, we need to immediately throw them at the presidency and watch them bang their head against it and lose.
She's not popular nationwide, though.
That's one issue. There's many issues with running AOC. I'm just talking from a practical standpoint that I think she serves a much better purpose right now, climbing up the party and trying to, I'd rather have her filling a role of like a Nancy Pelosi than I would running for president of the United States if she was really trying to climb up and gain influence and build her to have the best impact on the country policy-wise right now. I would rather see her continue to climb up the party. Maybe in the future, if she connects more to a wider swath of the public, then you can run it. But I don't think the moment calls for AOC to run for president. But it's also, the moment's 4 years from now, so I don't know what'll change in 4 years. So I can't really say exactly what the moment calls for. This is the whole problem with me trying to choose a person right now. Like if I said Gavin Newsom, in the next 4 years we have a big Gavin Newsom scandal, or we find out some weird stuff about the man, I don't know. But if I had to just choose somebody right now, and I know this might sound weird, but I'd probably go with Waltz, Tim Waltz. And I guess I like him policy-wise. I think that he showed that he can implement a progressive agenda with a slim majority in his home state. And it is true that, while it's true that he lost, he was more popular than Harris. He was more popular than, I think, basically every other person on either ticket. And even at the end, when his popularity started to dwindle a little bit, he still stayed above the fold. And I think that... while there might be a better candidate in 4 years from now for the moment, or if I had to pick one right now, you have to lock in your candidate 4 years in advance. In a rush, I'd probably enter in Tim Waltz.
Maybe I need to become a speechwriter for some Democrat, because when I hear them talk about healthcare, I just can't believe there's no candidate who just says this. Okay, let me give you a real example. This guy just got shot randomly in San Francisco. A guy just took out a gun, shot him in the face. He survived miraculously. Okay, random guy. He had to set up a GoFundMe in his hospital bed. This system, this healthcare system we have is despicable. For the richest country in the world. Italy can have universal healthcare, but we can't afford it. It's ridiculous. We need and it's
Bernie did this, and it was lightning in a bottle.
I know, and I want a candidate who, and I'm so sick of this, we need to improve access to the affordability. Make it simple. But
yes, they need to, again, elevator pitch it. Be like,
yeah.
My goal is to make sure every American has health care and make sure that they will never go bankrupt if they're in a hospital bed. That is my goal as the American president, and I will do that by making sure that there is always an option for Americans to choose that is publicly affordable. Something along like boom, boom, boom. Yeah. There, something like simple.
All right, thank you so much, Dylan. Keep up your good work.
Do you have a good one?